Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and this week I became very self-aware for a second there. Whoa, that was weird. I was just like, you're really just about to start talking out loud to no one, aren't you? Yes, you are. And then I launched right into it. That's weird. I should just re-record this, but I'm not going to, because it would feel forced and not genuine. And this show is all about being genuine, I guess. Anyway, what are we're talking about the Donner Party this week. More of a famous story in American history, but gonna go through the entire sequence of events to fill in the gaps that maybe you weren't aware of. You just know that it was just a group of people that ate each other. Spoiler alert, if you didn't know this story, that's how it ends. So let's jump into story time. In the spring of 1846, a caravan of nearly 500 wagons departed from Independence, Missouri to head west along the Oregon Trail. This is pretty much going to be a real-life version of the Oregon Trail game, which is probably what inspired the game to get. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Around this time, though, it really wasn't uncommon for groups of people to head west to California or Oregon in search of more freedom. But their options were either just a ridiculously long sea voyage around the bottom of South Africa because the Panama Canal didn't exist yet, or, and that would take months, if not a year or more, because you got to leave. Let's say you left from like Houston or Miami, so you're already kind of in the South, or New Orleans. You still got to go all the way around South America, which is a pretty big place, right? It takes up from top to bottom almost the entirety of the southern hemisphere on a vertical level. And so then you got to go around that. You got to go all the way back up, and then you got to travel around the entirety of Mexico and then find a place along California to settle. And so that's generally just wasn't, a feasible option. So obviously, the other option is you take a dangerous, very dangerous land route through hostile native territory, rugged terrain, deserts, mountains, all that kind of stuff. But the upside was it only took you 6 months to get there. So that's what most people ended up doing. And the Oregon Trail generally followed this kind of variety, this network of rivers to the primary ridge of the Rocky Mountains before it would then split in multiple directions, just kind of depending on where you wanted to go. Lansford Hastings, who had traveled to California in 1842, thought that the original Oregon Trail could be improved and ended up publishing a guide for future travelers that described an alternate route that was more direct than the traditional route and passed through the flat Great Salt Lake Desert. However, while it was more flat, the final 100 miles were across the Sierra Nevada mountains, which were much more difficult to navigate thanks to just the increased amount of snow that those mountains received as compared to other ranges in the Rockies that the Oregon Trail went through. George Donner and James Reed were on this caravan in 1846, and they were leading their families on the migration out west as part of a 500 wagon caravan before they actually joined a smaller group of 50 wagons to finish the final 200 miles to Fort Laramie in Wyoming. So on July 12th, 1846, the Donner Party received a letter from a rider on the trail sponsored by Hastings to promote his new route and that he would be waiting at Fort Bridger to guide them through it. So Lansford Hastings, this is his life now. He's found this new route, all right? And I'm sure some of you are annoyed by the way I say route, whatever. Doesn't matter. So maybe I'm the only one annoyed. I'm annoyed at myself for this is how I say it. It's fine. But now he just kind of hangs out on the trail, and then he pays people to go back and forth between these forts to kind of recruit people to come down through his version of the trail. And then, you know, he would pay people or he would charge people for him to navigate them through it. I mean, it seemed like a promising venture. Sure. So when the caravan arrived at a split at the Little Sandy River, the Donners and the Reed families decided to go south to Fort Bridger to take Hastings' new trail and elected George Donner as the leader of the group. Edwin Bryant, who was a journalist, went ahead of the party to scout the new trail ahead of the Donners, had concerns that their wagons were not sturdy enough to be able to navigate it, especially with so many women and children. So he sent letters back to the Donner Party advising them not to take the Hastings route. Even worse, Hastings had already left Fort Bridger to lead another group of wagons up ahead of the Donner Party. Jim Bridger, who ran Fort Bridger and really stood to gain from more travelers using the new route, actually ended up concealing Bryant's letters that he was trying to send to warn the Donner Party, and actually told the Donners that the Hastings cutoff would be a smooth trip and actually shorten the journey by 350 miles. So everybody is a little shady in this, if we're being honest. Hastings, he's kind of like scamming people, not really scamming, but he's using this as a business opportunity. Jim Bridger, he's straight up like making sure that, like, because he knows it's dangerous, but he doesn't want to deter people from coming through his fort and establishing commerce. So of course he's going to like do everything he can to prevent anything negative coming out about this route. Even more, Bridger said that water would be easy to find despite having to spend 2 days of that journey crossing a dried up lake bed. So, like everyone's full of crap here. So 4 days later, the group departed from Fort Bridger along the Hastings route in the Wasatch Mountains and were then quickly joined by the McCutcheon family. They immediately found, to no one listening, surprise, that the terrain was much rougher than Hastings had described in his pamphlet, and the trail was really difficult to follow due to just an overall lack of traffic cutting a clear, worn path through the wilderness. On August 6th, the group found a letter that Hastings had nailed to a tree advising them to stop on the route until he could return to show them an alternate way. 3 men in the group rode ahead to track Hastings down, who, they found him, but he only came back with them half of the way or part of the way, and then just gave the group general directions for which way they should go instead. So with this information, the Donner Party actually considered turning back, but instead they came to a consensus and decided to just blaze their own trail in the general direction that Hastings had described, despite not having a single member of the party with any experience in frontier survival. So already just terrible decision making, at this point. And so and here's the thing. Up until this point, I'm kind of on the Donner Party side. Like, they are getting screwed over. People are offering to help, but then they're kind of not. But at this point, when you have no one with no experience out here, no, go back, right? Spend the winter at Fort Bridger or something. I'm sure you could find accommodations, or just stop there. A bunch of people have stopped in Nebraska and Wyoming and just given up. That's why there's people that live in the Midwest. That's fine. There's no shame in that. But yeah, they were like, no, we have to keep moving forward. And so, yeah, they're just in a forest now with no path. And so they have to just make up their own. The group actually wasn't even able to travel 2 miles in a single day because the men were spending all of their time clearing brush, trees, and rocks to make room for the wagons. Do you know how long it takes to just walk 2 miles? Less than an hour, all right? I walk at a brisk pace. I can walk a mile in 20 minutes, all right? I don't know. That's probably average time, if we're being honest, all right? So that means I can walk 2 miles in about 40 minutes. These people in this entire wagon train did not go that far in probably a 12-hour period, which is insane, right? The group was eventually joined by another family, the Graves family, which now increased the size of this current caravan to 87 people with up to 80 wagons, because they were at 550. They got to Fort Bridger, and then they all split up and went their own ways. And so there was these 3 families here. in this group. On August 25th, the first member of the party died. Luke Halloran, a traveler who was already sick with tuberculosis, had kind of just been passed from family to family along the route in hopes that someone would care for him. So he was already on another caravan. He caught the tuberculosis and just got left. And people along the way just kind of tried to help him, couldn't really do it, and he'd finally gotten into this group, and then he eventually died. A few days later, the group found another letter from Hastings warning of extreme conditions over the next 2 days without any food or water. At this point, the party, who was already arguing and regretting every decision they'd made up to this point, reluctantly decided to rest their oxen and did their best to just prepare for the upcoming weather. The group did, however, make it to the Great Salt Lake Desert, obviously where modern-day Salt Lake City is in Utah. And it was, when they did it, it was in the middle of summer, right? Super hot. So thanks to the really, really high temperatures, the moisture beneath the Salt Lake bed rose up to the surface and then turned what looked like hard, stable ground into this gummy, mucky substance that caused the wagons to sink down into the ground. Even more, the heat became so intense that some of James Reed's oxen broke free from their harnesses and just delusionally ran off into the desert. Others became so weak that they were just left chained to their wagons and abandoned. By the time they reached the other side of the desert, what was normally a 2-day journey had taken 6 days. Like, they're just so bad at this. James Reed, who had suffered the most losses in the party, became especially authoritative and vocal, as he should be. He ordered 2 men to go up ahead to Sutter's Fort in California because he had heard that John Sutter, who obviously ran the fort, was very generous to pioneers and would likely come help him recoup some of his losses. And so while most of the party recovered at some natural springs on the edge of the desert, others tried to go back into the desert, into the lake bed, to try to recover their wagons and supplies. Eventually, the party did rejoin the traditional pioneer trail at the Humboldt River after at this point, they're a month behind. So things are not looking great. By mid-October, after being raided by a Paiute tribe, the group split up in hopes of making better time. When 2 wagons in James Reed's group got tangled, John Snyder, who was a member of the Graves family, began beating one of Reed's ox. Reed tried to break things up, but Snyder then began attacking Reed with his whip. Snyder also hit Reed's wife, Margaret, in the fight, and that is just not what you do, so Reed retaliated by stabbing Snyder to death. And because George Donner, who was supposedly the leader of this entire group, was in the other caravan that had traveled ahead, no one really knew how to handle this. United States laws at that time did not apply beyond the Continental Divide in the Rocky Mountains. So wagon trains were just kind of forced to handle their own justice whenever things like this happened. Although there were several witnesses to the murder, Snyder was more popular than Reed. And so some wanted Reed hanged for murder, but he was just eventually banished from the party without any food or supplies. And his family was ordered to stay behind and be cared for by the rest of the party. So basically, he has just been exiled in the desert, which not ideal, especially with no food and supplies in the middle of the summer. But as the party continued on, each family began to keep to themselves and just kind of grew. There a lot of distrust and discord kind of started growing among the group. The animals became increasingly weak, which forced everyone out of the wagons and to walk beside them to just kind of lighten the load. One man who was named Hardcoop, who was 70 years old, soon became too weak to walk, and they just left him by the river to die, which is insane. Although the Reeds were eventually able to catch up to the Donners, the entire party at this point had lost nearly 100 cattle thanks to starvation and raids from the Paiutes. By now, winter snows were actually starting to fall, and the party still had to get through the Sierra Nevadas, which is like the snowiest part. Each family went on their own and traveled through the pass, with the Donners leaving as the last group. Everyone was able to make it to Truckee Lake at the base of a 1,000-foot slope, except for the Donners, who were 5 feet below them on the ridge. By now, though, the pass that everyone needed to go through was inundated with snowbanks as tall as 10 feet high. Fortunately, 60 people near Truckee Lake were able to share 3 cabins that had been built by previous travelers and prepared to just spend the winter there. Like, there was no way they were going to get any farther. So yeah, I mean, they were lucky that like previous groups on the Oregon Trail had built these cabins there and they were just camping out there. On November 4th, snow began falling and it did not stop snowing for 8 straight days. That's insane. That's a big snowstorm. Without much food to go around, the oxen began dying. No one knew how to fish. I don't know how that's possible. I don't know how in the 1860s, no one knows how to fish, or it's the 1840s. How does no one know how to fish? That's like the one thing that you do in the 1840s to pass time, and no one knows how to do it. It's crazy. Although William Eddy, head of the Eddy family, had joined the caravan and had actually killed a bear, no one else was able to obtain any additional food. No one could hunt. No one could forage, apparently. Well, I mean, I don't know how you're going to forage with 10 feet of snow around you, but still, there's no food. Over the next 3 weeks, 3 attempts were made to scale the summit and continue the journey, but all of them failed. So food was scarce. The families at Truckee Lake started resorting to eating stray mice that were rummaging around the cabin, eating pieces of the oxide rugs in the cabins, and the bones of the dead oxen that had starved to death because there wasn't a ton of meat on them. Things down at the Donner camp were not any better. George Donner's brother Jacob and 3 others had already died, and another man had confessed to killing another member of the party back during the trek through the desert. By mid-December, a group of 17 men, women, and children left the camp and attempted to cross the mountain paths in hopes of making it down to Bear Valley, California. Most of this group actually had snowshoes, which made it somewhat easier, but at this point, the snow was 12 feet deep and caused problems for the inexperienced hikers, which was all of them. No one had experience doing this. One man, Charles Stanton, found some additional bear meat in his pack that his wife had given him and told the group that he was going to just stay behind and catch up with them later, and no one ever saw him again. His remains were actually found a year later, which didn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, he finds extra food and then he just leaves the group, I guess because he didn't want them to find out he had extra food and then everybody get in a fight over it. Well, then he just gets lost and dies. The rest of the group eventually got lost and disoriented. Patrick Dolan, who was part of this group, suggested that someone should die to feed the rest of the group. Others suggest, everyone was on board with this. They just didn't know how the person should die. Some people suggested a duel. Some people suggested like a lottery to choose who to sacrifice. William Eddy, however, insisted that they just keep moving until someone died, which is logical. But then they encountered another blizzard and was forced to stop. One man named Antonio was the first to die, followed by Franklin Graves. Patrick Dolan soon grew delirious, right? Like, yeah, they're eating people at this point, but like they don't have warm clothes, right? They don't have the equipment available to survive this. And he gets delirious, and then he strips off of his clothes and runs naked into the forest. He apparently got himself back together and returned a short time later, but soon died from just freezing to death, essentially. The group started picking pieces of Dolan's flesh off and eating it, but some had already become so weak by this point that they also died. Eddie and Mary Graves left to go hunt and actually ended up shooting a deer, but when they got back to the camp, the group was eating another man named Jay Fosdick, who had died overnight. So at this point, this group who had gone out ahead had been traveling for 25 days since leaving Truckee Lake and came across 2 men named Luis and Salvador, who were 2 members of the Miwok tribe who had been hired to actually help the party finish the journey. What's crazy, though, is that William Foster just immediately shoots these two guys, believing that their meat was going to be the only thing that would save the entire group, which is just nuts. It's like you find these two guys who were actually hired to come help you, and, like, I guess logic when you're starving, it's like, oh, you've come to help us. You've come to help us survive because you have a lot of meat on you, at least more than we do. So we're going to kill you and eat you for that. And so that's what happened. On January 12th, 1847, the group then arrived at a Miwok camp looking so disheveled that the Miwoks, I think it's Miwok, maybe it's Miwok, I don't know. Miwok sounds cuter. They initially ran because they thought like just the zombie apocalypse had started, and they ran away. But they eventually figured out, oh no, it's just silly white people. And so after spending a few days recovering with the Miwoks, Eddie continued on and made it to a small village in the Sacramento Valley, where he then organized a rescue party for the rest of the caravan. Meanwhile, James Reed, who, as you know, had already been exiled for killing, for stabbing that dude back, before they even got to the Sierra Nevadas. He had actually made it on his own to Rancho Johnson in California, and actually had become increasingly concerned about the fate of his family and the rest of the Donner Party because he hadn't heard from them. He begged Colonel John C. Fremont to send a team to help, and in return promised to fight in the Mexican-American War, which was about to come out, or I think was actually in the middle of happening. However, no one was able to reach the pass where the rest of the Donner Party remained because it was just too snowy, too impossible to get through. On February 4th, William Eddy, who had recuperated and had gone down into the Sacramento Valley, he launched his own rescue. And 2 weeks into their journey, they reached what has now become known as Donner Pass, where those cabins were located. A girl named Lavina Murphy was the first to be spotted, appearing from a hole in the snow asking, "Are you men from California or do you come from heaven?" Which, cute, but also kind of sad, right? Because, like, she's probably been waiting to die at this point. Like, no hope that anyone's going to come find them. Eddie's team quickly went around the camp and dispersed the food that they had brought to keep as many people alive as they possibly could, even though by the time they got there, 13 people at the camp had already died. The team then continued down the slope and brought back several members of the Donner family, including George, who at some point had suffered a hand wound that had become so gangrenous that it had paralyzed his entire body, which is nuts. Eddie then selected 23 of the strongest people to go back with him to California, leaving the remaining 33 people back at Truckee Lake for a second rescue. So, if you're keeping track, right, we started with 550-ish, right? They split up, and this group of 87 people went this alternate route and then went their own random route through the Rocky Mountains and then the Great Salt Lake Desert. All right. By now, you've got 87 people and 23 go back, leaving 33, which leaves, which means that 31 people have already died. All right. So a third of this group already dead, which I'm honestly surprised it's not more. But here's the thing. Eddie's got 23 people he's taking back from to California. 33 people stay behind at Truckee Lake for a second rescue. But things did not improve. Back at Truckee Lake, a cache station full of food that the rescuers had left was broken into by animals and completely emptied almost immediately. Two of the Reed children on the rescue back to California were actually too weak to keep going and were forced to turn back. Two others, John Denton and Ada Kesselberg, died on the rescue journey back. So maybe they weren't the 23 strongest. Maybe it's just the people that they felt needed to get back. A second rescue team arrived at Truckee Lake on March 1st. So just a month later. Although no one else had died at this point, which is kind of a miracle, everyone was just in real bad shape. The Reeds and McCutcheons were considering more cannibalism, as if that really wasn't just standard practice already. Members of the Donner Party were actually seen carrying a human leg just around, all willy-nilly. He's like, hey, I'm going to snack on this later. Weird, right? Elizabeth Donner actually refused to eat anything, but the Donner children were busy eating Jacob Donner's organs, which, sure, I guess. This time, 17 people were rescued, most of them children. So you're still left with about 16 people plus the 2, so 18 people still left. But this rescue didn't go well either. A blizzard swarmed the rescue party shortly after reaching the other side of the pass. Isaac Donner, who was only 5 years old, froze to death at this point. Mary Donner's feet were severely burned, frostbitten, after she fell asleep with them. Or no, sorry, it wasn't frostbitten. They were legitimately burned after she fell asleep with them in a fire because her feet were so frostbitten that she had lost all feeling with them. So she tried to put them in a fire to warm them up, and then she fell asleep, which is silly. The Breen and Graves families that were rescued were too weak to move and were just abandoned by the rescuers. So the rescue party, they don't have time for this. And people who were not cooperating or just unable to or too weak to were just left to die. William Eddy then intercepted the second rescue party and persuaded some of the team to go back up to Truckee Lake with him to get the rest of the survivors. And so on March 14th, the group arrived to find that Eddie's son had already been eaten, which has got to be like the worst news. Because he's probably already going back up there. He's probably not very optimistic about what he finds. And so he's probably like, all right, I'm pretty sure my family's dead. So where's my family? Did you at least bury them? No, we ate them. What? I laugh at it because it's so horrifyingly sad, right? The remaining members of the Donner family were then evacuated, and 2 more rescue attempts were made to get the rest of the people out, but both parties were forced to turn back because the weather was just too bad. On April 10th, a salvage party, which is definitely more morbid than a rescue party, made their way to Truckee Lake to recover whatever they could of the Donner family's belongings. While there, they found the bodies of Levina Murphy and Tamsin Donner. So that's sad. That's sad that Levina Murphy was the first one to see the rescue party and then never got rescued. Sat through 3 or 4 rescue parties and then never got rescued. That sucks, dude. Louis Kesselberg was actually found alive. The salvage party found someone alive with a pot of human flesh in his cabin, along with George's guns, jewelry, and $250 in gold. So that's probably not a good look. They found that all of that very suspicious, and they actually threatened to lynch Kesselberg if he didn't confess to murdering everybody and eating them, which is what they assumed they did. Kesselberg actually told the rescuers that he had done it, yes, but he had only done so at Tamsin Donner's suggestion to benefit her children one day. Kesselberg was the last person actually rescued from the Donner Party, which is insane. He's the only one left. He's killed and eaten everybody at the cabins. And he's just I guess he just resigned himself to just live there forever. Probably. You can't go back to civilization after that because everyone's going to know who you are. It's oh wait, you were in that Donner Party. Where's everybody else? I don't know. It's crazy. There's no way he gets out of it. So he probably just stayed up there thinking that no one else would come back for him, another rescue party. And then maybe he was optimistic about it, where it's I'll just help other travelers that come through here and eat them, right? Probably. But he was the last person rescued from the Donner Party. So of the 87 people that made it there, or at least went on this journey, 39 people had died, which is honestly a lot lower of a number than I think anyone would assume, right? You say here, put 87 people at the top of the Sierra Nevada mountains in the middle of winter. How many people do you think die? And if your answer is not all of them, then you're a very optimistic person. because I would assume that all of them would die, right? Especially in the 1840s when and no one knows how to hunt or fish or survive. Like, yeah, of course all 87 would die. But no, only 39 did. So, sure. The Reed family eventually settled in San Jose and actually ended up adopting 2 of the orphan Donner children. Louis Kesselberg ended up filing a lawsuit against several members of the party for defamation after he was accused of murdering Tamsin Donner. He was awarded $1 for this, but was forced to pay the court costs for the lawsuit, which was probably more than $1. But that is the end of this story. So there you go. The story of the Donner Party and Truckee Lake and all of that. And so, it's just a real silly story because I think, when you first learn about it, you just kind of are told that it's like, oh yeah, it was this group of people on the Oregon Trail and then they didn't make it in time and then they resorted to cannibalism to stay alive. But you can kind of see, like, when you take a dive into it, you can just kind of see all of the events that led up to it. And I don't feel bad. I don't feel bad for these people. You all set out on the Oregon Trail. You are well aware that no one has any survival experience. So even if it takes you longer, you should take the safest route. And they didn't. They instead took the hardest because they thought it was the shortest, and they ended up paying for it. So, no one was, maybe they learned that lesson while they were freezing to death and getting eaten, but let's see instead what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Number 1, real life Oregon Trail. Way scarier and more dangerous than video game Oregon Trail. That's probably a given, right? Number 2, if you ever go out on your own and you're going to try to make a 6-month hike across the country, learn some survival skills, right? Maybe when the creator of a trail tells you to not do it, or if you get to a point where you feel like you need to start blazing your own trail, don't. Turn back to safety. It's pretty simple. And number 3, worst case scenario though, man, just eat some ribs, good calf muscle. Again, we've talked about serial killers and cannibals in the past. I look, eating another person once they're dead, don't murder someone just to eat them. But if someone's already dead, all right, and you need to eat that person to survive, don't feel bad about it. All right. Don't feel bad because you got to do what you got to do. And it's just meat, it's just a little nice, probably like pork, a little good pork chop, maybe a little big back ribs, some, I don't know. All right. Well, I'm going to end that here. Next week on Our Weird World, we head into Christmas on a big bummer. Oh man, if you're white, get ready to feel bad about yourself. We are going to look at 4 race riots from history because, look, got to tell the stories, man. We're going to look at riots in Colfax, Louisiana, Elaine, Arkansas, Omaha, Nebraska, and Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's going to be a big episode full of white guilt. So, yay! Thanks for listening. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird. My girl is rocking that Billabong bikini like she's sponsored, asking me if I can rub that copper tone on her. Got a couple bucks, but I'm spending them like they pesos. Might be Motel 6'in', but it feels like Turks and Caicos. I got my solo cup amplifier playing all my jams in my Walgreens beach chair working on my tan. Feels like it's Jamaica and I'm sipping on some Red Stripe, but I'm in Decatur, baby, crushing that Bush Light. Put a little liquor in my coconut water. Party all day like you at your alma mater. Put a little liquor in my coconut water. Ice has started melting 'cause it's always getting hotter. Singing, hey, let's party like we on vacation. Hey, let's party like we on vacation. Got my toes up in the sand, cold one in my hand. Toes up in the sand, cold one in my hand, singing, hey, let's party like we on vacation.